Good afternoon. This is John Fager with VDP Web and JFM Concepts. We're going to give a presentation here that we presented at the PSDA, the Print Solutions Show in Baltimore this year originally. I am the lead developer and primary product operations person at VDP Web. And what we're going to talk about today is don't get killed by HTML. So this is winning cross-media strategies for printers and distributors. Little introduction here. The topics that I'd like to cover during this talk are successfully pricing HTML design. How is that done? I'd like to cover what exactly is HTML. So we'll take a look at some screenshots there, kind of explain what it's made of for folks who are salespeople or printers or familiar with print production but may not have worked with the web or email. How designing for web and email is different than print. So this is a really big topic. So there's a couple caveats that we can go over about what to look out for if you're used to doing print. What are the differences between the mediums, and what are some of the things that you can do there to work with the web and email more effectively, and to think about those processes that are a little different than designing traditional print. So the other thing that we're going to talk about, the last thing here, is content strategies to stay out of trouble. So we'll just talk about a few things when you're doing your designs, when you're putting together mock-ups with your clients that you may want to avoid that will keep you out of trouble with HTML and with email. So part one here, successfully pricing HTML design. Keep in mind there can be infinitely more complexity than with print design. So the idea here is that with print design, you've got a piece and it's a certain size, and however much size you can fill up with artwork and copy and design, that's it. That's all you have. There's also no interactive functionality there, so you don't have a lot of programming work, you don't have things to wire up, you don't have pop-up messages, you don't have interactions with databases. So the thing to point out is that some websites can cost $1,000 and some websites cost $150,000. For our purposes here and what we're trying to do with marketing and presenting a product, I think we want to try to keep most of these products very simple, very straightforward. And so we want to stay on the lower end of website costs, and we'll talk about what some of the expectations of that are. So that kind of leads us to our second point, and that's keep the scope of work clear. A clear scope of work is very important for the expectations of the client. So we want to manage those expectations up front. We want to say, these are the deliverables. This is exactly what we're going to give you for the website. And this is how many revisions we're going to do. These are the hours we're going to put into it. And the other thing that we want to keep in mind is that designing each layout, each design or template or style, essentially runs between 6 and 8 hours per design, and that's really just to go back and forth with the client to get the design down and to get the tweaks. So you can count on for each design being 6 to 8 hours, and then if there are additional pages, there will be some additional time and cost on that to get those set up. So let's talk about define a clear scope of work. You want to define the number of pages. Absolutely, we'll have a home page, we'll have a contact page, and we'll have a thank you page, or a home page, a product info page, whatever that is, whether you're having a one-page or a multi-page microsite, make sure that you put a cap on the number of pages expected. So describe the website. That's also important. Describe what the content is. So an example would be our main page is going to have 2 columns. There will be a logo, a basic opt-in form with a thank you page. That's one example of a very standard design for generic URLs and PURLs. Give a little bit of information, get a little bit of information, and present a thank you page. So the other thing to keep in mind when you're describing that website and to talk about with your client is, will there be an optimized version? More and more, we are seeing clients that are using QR codes or are distributing their piece via email as well as traditional direct mail. And so when that happens, you want to ask them, would you like to have a mobile version? A lot of people are reading that email on their iPhone or on their Android or their BlackBerry or some other version of smartphone, and iPads are in the mix and tablets as well now. So we need to see what's the presentation going to be on that. So estimate the initial work and state that additional changes add hours. This is so important because many clients, when they come in, they get promised by the sales guy this is kind of perfect, great website. No, it'll be great. And there's not a lot of definitive criteria around it. So what you want to do is, we talked about that 6 to 8 hours from before, and then some additional hours on the pages. So what we want to do is estimate the initial work. Get that done, get that to the client, do one round of basic changes for accuracy that you include or something like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to want to actually price out changes and tweaks as additional hours. So don't leave the expectation that you will perfect the site with multiple changes from the client without additional cost. That'll lead back and forth from the client and a lot of nitpicking. Change this to this color, change this to that color. Let's tweak this font. I don't like that image, and we want to avoid that. So one of the key points here is, if the client has costs to go back and forth, they won't waste your time on things that don't affect ROI. So you want to make sure that they are being concise with getting you information, and that they're not wasting your time with a bunch of back and forth, changing their mind, revisions, on and on and on. So it's important to make sure that they have, additional charges for additional work. So that brings us to our next topic, which is, what is HTML exactly? So in short, HTML is coded text that gives the web and email their content. So HTML, there's a couple flavors. There's HTML for the web. This is a type of HTML, also referred to as XHTML, that is used on web browsers and for web pages. Likewise, there is HTML for email. HTML for email doesn't follow the same standards as HTML for the web. Email renderers, the programs that actually display email, are a bit older. They don't adhere to the same style sheet rules. They don't have modern CSS techniques, won't display background images, things of that nature. So email code is a bit different as far as terms of layout. Even designs that are very similar, you can't just take web code and drop it into the email. You've got to have a different design strategy there. So the last real important component of the web that we're going to talk about for HTML is CSS, which stands for cascading style sheets. So a cascading style sheet is essentially what gives the web its structure, and we'll take a look at some of this. So HTML is text and images. I've got a screenshot up here, and you can see a div container, an image tag at h1. And this is actually what is being pushed to the browser. So when somebody requests a web page, this text code is what's sent back to the browser along with the visual images. So that's what the browser sees. And each browser decides how to render this code, how it's going to lay out, what it's going to do with it. So this is a big key difference here, is that the visual web page or the email is rendered on the fly. It's not sent as a single compiled image that is ready to go. So design differences from print. Let's talk about that a little bit. Print design, it's visual. A lot of people use InDesign, I think is a very popular common program. Photoshop is part of that. And it's very visual. You lay things out in your print software and you look at how it renders on the screen, and essentially what you see is literally what you get, and it's very drag and drop, and it's very straightforward. So certainly there are things in there about coloration, and there are things in there about making sure that you have a high enough resolution, but essentially what you see is what you get. It's not interactive. There aren't clicks, there aren't inputs. The print piece isn't going to grow when somebody clicks on it or does something. So limited number of pages, you have the size that you're printing, and that's what you get. So that's that exact size. And it prints correctly or it doesn't. At the end of the day, you wire up your print files and you spit it out on the printer, and it comes out like a nice printed piece that is a good, desirable product, or it isn't. So web design is a little bit different. Because it's text that's being sent along, and different browsers and different email programs render that code differently, there really are no good visual design tools out there. It's a different design paradigm. The web isn't meant to look just one way. It's meant to look different on different browsers. It wouldn't make sense for the web to look the same on an iPhone as it does on desktop browsers. And then aside from that, you've got some very different competitors in the market and evolution of browsers. So you've got Internet Explorer, and that's IE 7, IE 8, IE 9. Shortly we'll have IE 10 out. All of those render code very differently. There are subtle differences, and pages and code will not look the same, even though those are all made by Microsoft. The same thing is true with Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. Chrome, by the way, is becoming, if it has not already become, the top browser on the market. It is surpassing the combined power of Internet Explorer in its various versions. So Chrome is very important to test for. Safari is also important for Mac users and so forth. So Chrome, Safari, and Firefox all tend to be very similar about how they render, but it's important that we check all these. So the other thing to mention here is that there can be radically different widths and heights. You've got different size monitors, different size phones, and then there's feedback that can come into the page. Somebody's submitting an opt-in form, and there's required information that might be missing. That might cause a pop-up message to come on the screen that might displace something, push something down the page, make the form longer, and then that can affect how it looks to content that's to the left or to the right of it, or above or below it. So it's important to realize that things can shrink and grow, and that's a good thing. That's the interactive part of the web. It's designed to be flexible, and we want it to be flexible. So the other thing that we need to consider is that the size in kilobyte. This is actually the amount of size on disk that the resources, the assets for the page take up. Primarily, images are our big eater of the size on disk, the amount of kilobytes in a page. And it's really important that we optimize those images and that we actually keep certain designs, practices, and patterns under control so that the page doesn't get too large. A large page can cause it to load more slowly. It can also cause some frustration for folks that are on mobile devices. And it can also actually negatively impact your search rankings. Google likes clean, fast, lean pages. They know that very popular, very big sites are not going to have big, heavy, clunky, ill-designed pages. It's just not possible. So when Google sees a nicely done, professionally rendered page with optimized images, that does help with rankings and their understanding of your level of professionalism. So, and then the last point here about web design before we go to the next slide is it is interactive. There are links to click, there may be drop-down buttons, there may be pop-up messages, there may be movies that expand, modal windows on the same page. I think we've all seen that. So it is interactive, and things can be hidden, they can be moved around, they can slide, effects, changing out of images, scrolling banners, things like that. So you can, even on a single page, end up with a lot more content, a lot more stuff to plug in. And that is why it's important to actually give an expectation with the client about the types of things that will be on each page. Our presentation continues in part 2 on our YouTube series.